High in the northern Colorado Rockies, where pine forests cling to rugged granite slopes and mist hangs above a wild river, lies the Cache la Poudre Wilderness. Over 9,000 acres of untamed land where nature still leads the way. This is one of the few places where the Cache la Poudre River, Colorado's only wild and scenic river, still flows free, just as it has for thousands of years. The first known residents were the Paleo Indians, arriving around 12,000 BC. They hunted mammoth and ancient bison across these valleys. The Clovis and Folsom peoples followed, leaving behind spear points at sites like Dent and Lindenmeyer. These were not just survivalists. They were creators and traders, shaping tools and stones that came from as far away as Texas. By 9000 BC, Plano peoples continued the tradition, thriving where the river gave life. Their presence reminds us that humans have always been a part of this ecosystem, not separate from it. By the 1800s, the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne called this region home. The Ute, one of the oldest indigenous groups in the Rockies, roamed in the high country, while the Cheyenne and Arapaho favored the river valleys. The Arapaho still tell stories of their time along the Poudre, a favorite gathering and camping place of the tribe. But as westward expansion surged, treaties were broken, and these peoples were displaced from their ancestral land. By the 1960s, pollution, population growth, and development threatened to quiet the wild heart of the Poudre. Then came a new era, one of preservation. In 1980, Congress designated the Cache la Poudre Wilderness, 9,258 rugged acres tucked within the Roosevelt National Forest, as a part of the National Wilderness Preservation System. Here, steep granite canyons, forests of ponderosa and lodgepole pine, and habitats for deer, bear, coyotes, and mountain lions were protected forever from roads, mining, and machines. Only one trail, the Mount McConnell National Recreation Trail, winds through it, and in 1986, the river itself earned protection as a wild and scenic river, ensuring its upper 75 miles would never be dammed. And in 1996, Congress went even further, designating the Cache la Poudre National Heritage Area to honor both its national and cultural legacy. Together, these protections celebrate the river as both lifeblood and lesson, a reminder of how people and wilderness intertwine. The Poudre faces growing threats. Across the wilderness, mountain pine beetles have carved through forests once thick and green, leaving behind vast stands of dead fuel. The proposed Northern Integrated Supply Project, or NISP, looms as another challenge, aiming to divert water from the Poudre to support growing cities downstream. As recreation increases, so do careless fires and pollution, each spark and footprint a potential scar. But above all, it's the wildfires themselves, fueled by drought, heat, and human activity, that are reshaping the landscape faster than ever before. In 2012, northern Colorado faced a reckoning. The High Park fire, ignited by lightning west of Fort Collins, tore through more than 87,000 acres and destroyed 259 homes. But it wasn't just the flames that left their mark. When the rains came, massive erosion followed. Ash and sediment washed down steep slopes into the Cache la Poudre River, turning its once clear waters a murky gray. Fish died, reservoirs filled with debris, and the entire watershed reeled from the shock. The High Park fire exposed a hard truth, that decades of fire suppression, drought, and dense forest growth had created conditions where fire was no longer a cleansing force of nature, but a catastrophe waiting to happen. Fires like High Park and Cameron Peak aren't just acts of nature. They're symptoms of how we've changed the land. Climate change stretches hot, dry seasons longer each year, decades of fire suppression have built unnaturally dense forests, and the loss of indigenous fire stewardship has erased centuries of wisdom that once kept these ecosystems in balance. Today, the path forward is clear and urgent. Reintroducing prescribed burns, embracing traditional ecological knowledge, and educating recreationists about fire are no longer optional. They're essential to keeping the Cache la Poudre and the wilderness it sustains alive for generations to come. The The Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed estimates it can take a decade or more for a burned watershed to recover. Until then, aquatic life struggles, drinking water becomes harder to treat, and erosion continues to reshape the land. In the decade after the flames, the Cache la Poudre Wilderness has become a living classroom, a place where scientists, volunteers, and communities are rewriting the story of wildfire. In wilderness, threats are inevitable, and the people protecting the Poudre have learned to anticipate, not react. That's why fire response now begins long before the first spark. Crews are trained, equipment is staged, and response networks link local, state, and federal agencies in real time.
This ties into key management principles, the first being that dealing with threats may require long-term activity. In the case of wildfires, ecosystem restoration in a burn area takes decades to recover, and developing effective wildfire management plans require trial and error and can span for long periods of time. Another key principle is the shifting baseline syndrome. Since wildfire suppression within the U.S. Forest Service began only 100 years ago, current land managers have not witnessed wildfire activity before these policies and may not realize that current events are not typical for the area.
Wildfire recovery here isn't a single agency's job. It's a community movement. The Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed launched a massive fire recovery and restoration program to repair the land and safeguard the water. Their goal? To protect water quality, restore ecosystem health, and strengthen community resilience. They partnered with the Cameron Peak Reforestation Group, who worked hand in hand with private landowners to replant trees, raise funding, and monitor regrowth. And the Poudre Fire Authority helps nearby towns create community wildfire protection plans, identifying high-risk zones, reducing fuels, and teaching residents how to live safely with fire. Together, they've turned tragedy into collaboration, proving that when protected areas are managed as a part of a larger community effort, recovery reaches the entire landscape.
This highlights our third management principle.
Threatening processes will be diminished when PAs are managed as a part of a community effort to achieve conservation outcomes at a landscape level. Recovery on the Poudre isn't guesswork. It's guided by science-based planning. Using risk and incident management systems, experts identified the steepest, most erosion-prone slopes. There, helicopters spread aerial mulch, the largest wood mulch operation in the nation, to protect soil, slow runoff, and shelter new life. Monitoring is constant. Researchers from Colorado State University, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute track water quality, soil moisture, and regrowth. It's a perfect example of how environmental planning and evaluation shapes smarter, adaptive management in real time. So far, over 9,200 acres have been mulched across the Poudre watershed, stabilizing hillsides and improving water clarity. Flooding and debris flows are still a risk, but they're less severe than models predicted. Reforestation is slow, yet steady, and the community's understanding of wildfire has evolved from fear to respect. That's success, not perfection, but resilience. The Cache la Poudre Wilderness will always face fire, drought, and change. But through anticipation, collaboration, and science-driven planning, those threats can be transformed into lessons. Because when wilderness is managed as a community, a fire is treated not as the enemy, but as a teacher. The land learns to heal, and so do we.